I stood there in the dust and the noise. The sound of steel meeting concrete was the sound of my future, my skyscraper. It wasn't just a building. It was 12 years of my life, 12 years of financial struggle, architectural brilliance, and silent, grinding determination. I was Marcus Holloway, the principal architect, the lead developer, the owner. But today I was just Marcus, the temporary laborer on Site C. I always started my projects this way. I came in dirty. I wore the boots and the cheap gloves. I needed to see how the plans were translating to the real world, past the shiny reports and the polished presentations. I needed to see the flaws the supervisors were hiding. I saw the flaw immediately. It wasn't minor. A crucial stress beam near the central foundation pillar was offset half an inch, a small error that would become a catastrophic failure when the wind hit the 40th floor. I needed to flag it immediately. I tried to get the attention of the nearest crew chief, but he waved me off, preoccupied with the delivery manifest. That's when Rick appeared. Rick Holloway. No relation to me, thank God, despite sharing the last name. He was the site foreman for this entire sector, a man built like a cinder block and just as subtle. He was known for his booming voice and his absolute certainty that he knew better than anyone. He spotted me near the foundation blueprints I had subtly unrolled. "Hey, you!" he barked. His voice was raw sandpaper. It cut straight through the relentless whine of the jackhammers. I walked over, holding the plans folded neatly under my arm. I kept my voice neutral, respectful, blending into the role I was playing. "Sir," I started, "I think there is an issue with the C4 stress reinforcement here. It's offset from the pillar base by approximately 12 millimeters. We need to stop pouring and reset those connection plates." Rick didn't even look down at the schematics in my hand. He looked straight at my face, at my worn leather gloves, at the way my hard hat sat slightly askew on my head. He laughed. It was a nasty, dry sound, like rust being scraped away. "You're telling me my job, boy," he sneered. He took a heavy step toward me. His shadow swallowed mine. "You were hired this morning to move dirt, sweep up debris, and maybe fetch coffees if we felt generous. You were not hired to calculate shear forces or dictate engineering changes." His eyes narrowed, filled with a dismissive irritation that was far too familiar. "I don't know where you think you learned to read plans like that, but I'm tired of seeing you standing around looking confused. You move too slow. You ask too many questions. And frankly, I don't like your attitude." He threw his thick hand up, waving me away as if I were a bothersome fly. "You know what? We don't need your kind of help out here today, or any other day. We're over budget on labor anyway." He pointed sharply towards the rusty chain-link gate leading off the site. "Grab your lunchbox and go. You're done. Fired. We'll cut you a check for half the day. Now get lost." The noise of the site seemed to die completely. The whole crew paused. Welders stopped sparking. Scaffolders stopped climbing. 30 workers, all looking at the black guy who just got humiliated and canned for doing exactly what he was told. Working. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from panic, but from the pure, searing heat of the injustice. I felt the familiar burn of being dismissed, of being judged and deemed incapable before I spoke a full sentence, before I could prove anything. I slowly nodded. I looked down at the dirty patch pocket on my construction vest. I reached in, pulling out my phone, which was sealed in a protective sleeve against the dust. I reached deeper into the pocket, finding something else, something heavy and smooth. I didn't immediately pull out the silver key card. Not yet. I kept it hidden in my palm. I looked Rick straight in his red, satisfied face. He was basking in the petty power trip. I cleared my throat, careful to keep my voice low, just loud enough for the closest workers to hear. "You fire me, Rick?" I asked. the respect gone from my tone. He scoffed. Yeah, I just fired you. Are you hard of hearing? I ignored him and dialed a number I knew by heart. It was the direct line to Brenda, the head of corporate operations. It rang once, sharply. Brenda, yes, it's Marcus. I need you to dispatch the senior corporate security detail immediately to Sector C. I want them to meet me at the foundation perimeter. I paused, watching Rick's smile falter slightly. He took a nervous half step back. I need the project foreman for Sector C, Richard Holloway, escorted off the premises immediately. Complete termination for gross negligence, safety protocol failure, and abuse of authority against a team leader. I hung up without waiting for her reply. I finally pulled out the item concealed in my palm, the solid matte silver key card. It wasn't a security badge. It was the master key to the site manager's office complex, the permanent steel and glass building 2 miles away where the real decisions were made. The key had my corporate signature embossed on it. I dropped it, not onto the ground, but straight into the fresh concrete mixture that the crew was smoothing over the foundation base. It sank slowly, gone forever. I looked back at Rick. He was sweating now, despite the morning chill. His face was a sickly gray beneath the layer of construction dust. He seemed to shrink instantly. Rick, I said, my voice finally dropping the humble borrowed tone. That issue with the C4 stress point? If that structure fails, my company loses $500 million. And I lose my life's work. You just ignored the lead architect and principal owner of Holloway Sterling Development Group. I reached up and unclipped the dirty hard hat I had been wearing. I tossed it onto the ground where it rolled to a stop, revealing my clean haircut and tired, focused eyes. Which, by the way, I concluded, giving him a small, sad smile, is me. The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the wind dared to move. I walked over to the stack of lumber where I had left my briefcase hidden beneath some tarp. I pulled it out, dusted it off, and snapped the latches open. Inside was not a lunch, but a thick leather-bound folder. I pulled out a document and folded it over, revealing only the embossed seal and the signature line. Brenda will be here in 5 minutes, I told Rick, loud enough for the 30 now motionless workers to hear every word. Until then, I want you to walk over to your truck, get your personal tools, and I want you to use the next 300 seconds to write out a full list of every single safety violation you have knowingly ignored on this site in the last 6 months. I tapped the paper against my leg, because whether this termination is simply for gross negligence or whether it includes legal action is going to depend entirely on what I find in your handwriting. Start counting now. I didn't wait for him to move. I turned to the remaining stunt crew, my architect hat firmly back on. Anyone who feels they were wrongly terminated by Mr. Holloway, see my assistant Brenda when she arrives. We will review every single complaint. Now, I looked back at the exposed, vulnerable foundation. Someone get a crane, and let's fix that C4 support beam. We just lost 5 minutes, and we are no longer behind schedule. We are setting a new standard today. I looked at the foreman, who hadn't moved. He was frozen in pure disbelief. This was the first lesson in the power of knowing who you truly are. But I knew this was only the beginning. The real rot didn't just stop at one racist foreman. It went deeper, higher. I had a whole building to clean and 8 more sectors to inspect. Frank laughed, a wet, ugly sound that echoed off the steel girders. He loved the spotlight. He loved having this audience. There it is, gentlemen, Frank announced, sweeping his arm toward me. The cost of cutting corners. The cost of hiring unverified talent. He didn't use the word, but every man on that crew knew exactly what he meant by unverified. My chest felt cold, even under the midday sun. I stood absolutely still. The silence of the crew was the loudest part of the scene. They weren't looking at Frank. They were looking at the ground. This wasn't just about a job. This was about dignity, systematically stripped away, brick by painstaking brick. I remembered the early mornings, arriving before dawn, doing three men's work just to get Frank off my back. He would inspect my welds with a magnifying glass. He would critique the way I drank my coffee. He hated the efficiency of my hands. He hated my silence. He hated that he couldn't break me with simple shouting. His technique was subtle humiliation. It was the constant, low hum of disrespect that drains you slowly, like a cracked pipe in the foundation. He made the new guys call me Elijah the Excess. He said I was extra, a burden. Frank pointed a thick, meaty finger at my safety jacket. "Take it off," he commanded. "And your hard hat, company property." I looked down at the jacket. I had paid more for the specialized materials of that jacket than Frank earned in a month. But I said nothing. This was the final piece of the charade, the ceremonial stripping away of identity. He wanted me to walk out, head bowed, holding my meager bag of tools. He wanted the crew to remember this moment forever. He wanted to cement his power through my public shame. I thought about my grandmother, the way she had always told me, "When they try to shrink you, Elijah, you stand taller. You make them strain their neck to see your crown." I had been prepared for this moment since the first day I put on the standard issue boots. I had engineered this exact confrontation. Frank stepped closer, his breath smelling like stale cigarettes and cheap coffee. He reached out to snatch the laminated ID badge clipped to my chest. "Give it here," he snarled. "I need to make sure this is properly voided in the system. Don't want any stragglers trying to come back after hours and steal copper." He implied I was a thief, right there, in front of the dozens of workers who knew I was the hardest, most dependable worker they had. A small tremor ran through my hand, but I forced my muscles to relax. The time for performance was over. Frank's fingers brushed my chest. That touch was the line, the absolute final violation I had allowed him. I took a slow, deep breath, tasting the dust of the construction site. The site that Frank thought he ran. The site that was, in reality, mine. I moved my hand quickly, intercepting his attempt to grab the badge. My palm settled flat against the sealed manila envelope I was carrying, the one Frank assumed contained my lunch receipt or maybe a bus schedule. Frank blinked, surprised by the resistance. "What are you doing, boy? Don't make this difficult." The silence of the crew deepened. They knew something was wrong. Elijah never pushed back. I met Frank's eyes. They were puffy, red-rimmed, and filled with careless superiority. "I won't be making this difficult for me, Frank," I said. My voice was low, not the strained, tired voice of the laborer he knew. This was the voice of the man who ran meetings, closed deals, and signed 9-figure checks. It was professional, crisp, and utterly devoid of fear. Frank squinted. "What did you just say?" I ignored his question. The game required precision now. I needed to move from employee to executive in one clean transition. I didn't take off the hard hat. I pushed it back slightly on my forehead, just enough so he could see my eyes clearly. I reached inside the envelope and withdrew a single heavy card. It wasn't a standard employee badge. It was a metal engraved pass for unrestricted access to all levels of the development. It had my name, Elijah Vance, and the title Chief Architectural Officer. I held the card between my thumb and forefinger. Frank's attention was fixed on my hands. Confusion was starting to creep over his face, mixing poorly with the residue of his anger. I was going to wait until the quarterly review next week to address the systemic efficiency issues, Frank, I said, my voice cutting through the humid air. But since you've decided to move the timeline up, Let's talk about standards now, he stammered, his mind unable to compute the language I was using. Quarterly review, systemic issues. Vance, I don't know what kind of stunt you're trying to pull, he sputtered. That card? That's not authorized personnel. I cut him off, my voice rising just enough to carry to the stunt crew standing 20 feet away. Frank, did you just fire the leading architect and development owner of the Vance Towers project in front of 30 witnesses? The words hit the worksite like a dropped anvil. Frank's entire demeanor dissolved. His jaw went slack. The flush of arrogance drained away, leaving his face pale and blotchy. He looked from my polished, expensive metal card back to my dusty worker's uniform, and then to the site plans pinned to the temporary wall behind him. The name Vance Development was printed in bold letters across the top of the renderings. He didn't just fire a laborer, he had just publicly humiliated the man who held his entire career and this entire multi-million-dollar project in the palm of his hand. The crew was starting to shuffle. Whispers moved through the dust like quicksilver. Frank tried to laugh it off, a desperate, hollow sound. Wait, Elijah, you're joking, right? This is some kind of union prank, isn't it? I let the question hang there, heavy and accusatory. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply looked past him, scanning the site with the eye of someone who had spent 4 years designing every steel beam and concrete pour. Frank, I stated, moving slightly closer until he was forced to step back. Before we proceed with your termination, which rest assured is non-negotiable, I need a concise update. I paused, allowing the word termination to sink deep into the pit of his stomach. I need to know the current status of the C4 structural reinforcement permits. You were supposed to sign off on those last Friday. Confirm the exact time the physical documents were submitted to city inspection. The question wasn't about my termination. It was about his job performance. It was a specific, technical detail only an executive would know to ask. He stared at me, panic setting in. He didn't know the status. He hadn't signed them. He thought he could bluff his way through. He thought he was untouchable. I can look that up, sir. Vance. Mr. Vance, he corrected quickly, the title tasting like ash on his tongue. No, Frank, you need to tell me now, because the C4 permits were the one thing. You were not allowed to delay. Tell me, foreman, I said, emphasizing the title he was about to lose. Are those permits secured, or did you put them off for another one of your 3-hour lunches? The silence was total. The construction site had frozen. Everyone was waiting for the answer that would seal Frank's fate. I already knew the answer. I had known for 3 days. This was going to be painful for him, and utterly necessary for me. The dust of the lot hung heavy, thick with the silence Wallace's booming voice had left behind. He stood there, chest heaving, triumphant in his petty tyranny. Get your belongings, worker, and stay off my site. I didn't move. The other guys in the crew shifted, looking anywhere but at me, anywhere but at Wallace. They knew what they had just witnessed. They knew it wasn't about incompetence. It was never about the work. Wallace expected anger. He expected pleading. He expected the desperate look of a man who needed the paycheck to feed his family, willing to swallow any insult. But I wasn't that man. Not anymore. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me, like the quiet before the biggest storm. This moment, this public humiliation, was exactly what I needed. It was the final, undeniable proof. My mind drifted back 6 months to the start of this entire project. My firm had won the contract, the largest commercial development in the city's history. My design, my vision. We held the first meeting with the construction management team, the high-level executives, the investors. Everyone wore Italian suits and carried expensive leather briefcases And there I was, the lead architect, Marcus Sterling. I was 35, sharp, credentialed. I introduced myself. I laid out the 10-year plan. I spoke about the sustainable materials, the innovative structural engineering. When I finished, one of the investors, an older man with gray hair and a dismissive smile, turned to the white chief engineer. Excellent vision, the investor said, nodding toward the engineer. But are you sure the young man understood the budget constraints? Maybe have him run the numbers again, just to be safe. He didn't look at me. He just assumed I was the junior member, the assistant, the one who needed oversight. I was the black man in the room, so I must be the one making the mistake. My engineer, a good man named Thomas, had flushed red and started to correct him, but I stopped him with a slight motion of my hand. I smiled. A professional, tight smile. That day, I realized something painful. No degree, no amount of money, no level of professional achievement completely erased the need to be allowed to succeed. I was still being evaluated based on what they expected to see, not what I actually presented. That meeting was the seed. I decided then that I needed to understand the project from the ground up, literally. I needed to see the blind spots in the system, the points where arrogance and bias corroded the chain of command. I needed to know exactly who was running my vision into the ground. And so, Marcus, the worker, was born. A temporary position, a pseudonym, a disguise that allowed me to observe the real, ugly truth of how this company, and specifically Wallace, operated. Now, 6 months later, the ugly truth had just fired me in front of 12 witnesses. I blinked, returning to the present moment, standing dusty and humiliated in the sun. Wallace was still glaring. "Do you hear me, boy?" he spat out. The insult stung, but it was hollow. I finally spoke, my voice low and steady. It was the first time I had used my true voice on that job site, a voice accustomed to boardrooms, not lunch breaks. "I heard you, Wallace." I looked directly into his eyes, not meeting his anger, but cutting right through it to the deep-seated fear beneath. He hated me because he feared what he couldn't control. He hated my calm competence. "You speak a lot about respect for this site," I continued, gesturing vaguely at the steel frame rising behind him. "But you have no respect for the people who build it, no respect for the vision, no respect for the job." Wallace's face shifted from triumph to confusion. This wasn't the response he practiced against his workers. "You lecturing me now, Sterling? You are dismissed. Move." I shook my head slowly. "I am not lecturing you, Wallace. I am documenting you." I reached into the pocket of my worn work jacket. Not for keys, not for my wallet. I pulled out a plain standard issue site badge. It was the visitor's badge I had used for my cover. I dropped it into the dirt at Wallace's feet. "I won't be needing this," I said. Then I reached into the breast pocket of my t-shirt. I pulled out a second item, something Wallace had never seen me carry before. It was a custom-made titanium keycard, heavy and matte black, engraved with a small stylized logo, the official emblem of Sterling Architectural Group. It was the master key, granting access to every locked area on the development, every secure office, and every filing cabinet containing the proprietary schematics. I slipped the card slowly into the pocket of my jeans. I didn't show Wallace the logo, but I let him see the weight of the card, the way I handled it. "I am not leaving the site, Wallace," I said softly. "I am changing my clothes." He scoffed, but the sound was shaky. "What are you talking about? You got 5 minutes before security." "Security knows my car, Wallace," I cut in, "and they know where I'm going." I glanced at my wristwatch. It was 11:45 a.m. The pre-construction meeting is scheduled for noon sharp, upstairs in the temporary management office. We are reviewing the final Phase 1 budgets and the architectural adjustments. I paused, letting the words hang there. Architectural adjustments. The key stakeholders are gathering right now. The people who pay for all of this, the people who sign the checks, the people who decide who stays and who is escorted off the property permanently. I met his gaze one last time. His eyes were wide now, scanning my face, trying desperately to reconcile the dusty worker he just fired with the calm, polished authority in my voice. He was starting to suspect the depth of his error, but his ego wouldn't let him believe the full truth. I need to be on time, I finished, because I need to approve that budget, and I need to lead that meeting. I turned my back on him. I walked slowly away from the stunned crew, leaving Wallace standing in the dirt, clutching at the frayed edges of his rapidly collapsing authority. I left my tools where they lay. I walked straight toward the secured air-conditioned trailer, the one labeled Executive Management, No Access. I had played the part of the humiliated worker. Now it was time for Marcus Sterling, lead architect and owner, to go to work. But first I needed to change out of these dusty clothes. I needed to prepare for the look on Wallace's face when he realized his target wasn't just unemployed. His target was the only person who could legally employ him, and he had precisely 15 minutes until he was due in my conference room. The last few days on the site were different. They felt heavy. I knew the end was coming. The trap was set. Bruno, the foreman, sensed it too, but he misinterpreted the tension. He thought my silence was submission. He thought my concentration meant I was breaking. He pushed harder than ever. The Crestwood development was high-end. Everything needed to look pristine, even during the framing stage. But Bruno cut corners everywhere, relying on intimidation to cover sloppy work. I was the only one who saw the documentation of every violation: the misaligned support beams, the cheapened concrete mixture, the ignored safety regulations. I had come for the discrimination, but I stayed for the negligence. This wasn't just about a racist man. It was about criminal recklessness, built on contempt for the people doing the heavy lifting. "Hey, Lionel!" Bruno's voice sliced through the cold morning air, sharp as sheet metal. I was stacking lumber, carefully cataloging the warped pieces that should have been rejected. "You slow today? You move like you waiting for a handout." I kept my eyes on the wood. "Just ensuring quality control, foreman." He laughed, a hacking sound that carried across the frozen dirt. "Quality control? You're here to hammer nails, boy. You don't get paid to think. Leave the thinking to the white collars inside." I felt the burn rise in my chest. It wasn't anger yet. It was pressure, the kind of slow, mounting pressure before an explosion. Every single worker there heard him. They looked down, focused on their boots or their tools. They didn't want the heat to turn on them. I understood that silence. I used to hate it, but now I needed it. They were witnesses, unwilling but necessary. My father used to tell me that the greatest power wasn't the ability to inflict pain, but the ability to absorb injustice without letting it destroy the plan. My father ran a small excavation company 20 years ago. He was good, honest, brilliant. He lost a massive city contract, the contract that would have secured his future, because a competing firm fabricated evidence of delay and shoddy materials. They didn't just win the bid, they destroyed his reputation by weaponizing his race and his presumed lack of sophistication. He didn't have the money or the influence to fight the legal battle against the institutional prejudice. He died a few years later, working jobs beneath his skill, his spirit broken. He taught me everything about architecture, about building things that last. He taught me the true cost of shoddy materials, the erosion of trust. When I started my own development company, after years of grinding through architecture school and then securing my first major loans, I promised myself two things. I would only build excellence, and I would never let another black worker be treated with the same casual, destructive contempt that cost my father everything. That memory was the steel reinforcing my patience on the Crestwood site. Every insult from Bruno, every dismissal, every extra hour in the cold, it was currency. I was paying for the perfect, unassailable timing of the reversal. I needed Bruno to commit professional suicide on camera. I needed him to not just dismiss a worker, but to attack a perceived subordinate's dignity based entirely on prejudice. I needed him to do it in front of the entire crew, and I needed the moment to be undeniable, captured by the hidden cameras I had discreetly positioned weeks before. That afternoon, he gave me the final necessary push. We were scheduled for an important safety inspection the next morning, a formality before the next round of multi-million-dollar financing was released. Bruno was sweating. He was frantic about a massive pile of discarded concrete and debris that needed to be cleared from the main thoroughfare. He called me over, waving his hand dismissively. "Lionel, get that sludge pile cleared out. Now! No one leaves until that area is clean. And don't you dare leave any dust." I looked at the pile. It was dense, heavy, improperly mixed waste. It would take 4 men with a bobcat 2 hours. I was alone, with a shovel and a single wheelbarrow. "Foreman," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "That's a two-person job, minimum, and it's quitting time. We can start first thing in the morning." He stepped right into my personal space, his breath smelling of stale coffee and cigarettes. He was testing me, pushing the breaking point. "You telling me how to manage the site, boy?" he hissed, loud enough for the equipment operators across the yard to pause their machines. "I am telling you, it is an impossible task for one man. Safety first," I replied, my voice calm, level. That was the trigger. The word safety infuriated him because he was consistently ignoring the protocols I had established in the site blueprint. He pointed a thick, grubby finger toward the exit gate. "You're done, Lionel. You're finished. Get your lazy carcass off my site. Don't come back tomorrow." He turned to the rest of the crew, his chest puffed out. "Anyone else got a problem with hustle? You can join him." He waited for them to react, for them to back down. They did. But I did not move toward the gate. I stood exactly where I was, shovel still in hand. I looked at the concrete waste, then at the face of the man who had just stolen my time and insulted my intelligence one final, unforgivable time. The humiliation was complete. The documentation was secure. The stage was set. It was time to stop being Lionel, the underpaid, slow construction worker. It was time to become Mr. Sterling, the owner of everything he could see. I let the moment stretch, thick and quiet. I needed him to ask me why I wasn't leaving. He took the bait. "What are you waiting for, Lionel? Your severance check? Get going before I call security to escort you out." I slowly lowered the shovel handle to the ground. The cold metal thudded softly against the dirt. I reached into the inner pocket of my heavy, grease-stained jacket. It was time to retrieve the evidence of who I really was. But as my fingers brushed the smooth leather of the wallet containing my official identification and my site access key, the master key, I hesitated. I knew that the moment I showed it, the game was over. The years of planning, the months of endurance, the humiliation of the past weeks, all condensed into one powerful, glorious second. Did I want to do this now? Or did I want to let him stew overnight, let him enjoy his victory, only to crush him under the weight of reality the next morning, when the official inspectors arrived? I withdrew my hand, leaving the wallet hidden. "Foreman," I said, keeping the title respectful, professional. "I understand you have made your decision." Bruno smirked. "It's the best decision I've made all week. Now move." I paused one last time, looking past him, down the long corridor of the site to the temporary office trailers where my real team was waiting, watching the live security feed. I smiled, a very small private smile that Bruno mistook for defeat. "All right, foreman," I said, finally moving. "But I think you might want to call that security detail anyway. You're going to need them in the morning." I didn't head toward the worker exit. I walked directly toward the administration office trailers, the one place no manual laborer was allowed to go. And I knew the master key I held could open every locked door on that site, including the one to Bruno's permanent firing. He watched me go, baffled and furious, screaming my name. He had no idea he had just walked me straight to my final, most important meeting, the meeting where I would sign off on his termination. The silence that fell over the construction site was heavier than the concrete we had poured that morning. Gary's face, moments before, puffed with the heat of his cheap authority, was now a sickly, ashy white. He stared at the gold trim on the ID badge I held up. He stared at the corporate seal. He stared at the title, lead architect and principal investor. "This is some kind of sick joke, Harrison," Gary finally stammered out, his voice thin and shaky. "A ridiculous attempt to save your job. Put that away and get off my site." He still saw the hired help. He still saw the man he felt comfortable humiliating. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I pulled my phone from the breast pocket of my dirty work shirt. I ignored his frantic movements as I hit the speed dial. A smooth, confident voice answered immediately. It was Mr. Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Development, the very company that owned this project. "Elijah, are the site plans finalized?" The sound of my real name, Elijah Rourke, hitting the dusty air was a devastating, audible blow to Gary. I spoke clearly, projecting my voice across the stunned workers. "Mr. Sterling, yes, the crew is assembled, and I am speaking particularly in the presence of Mr. Gary Peterson, the foreman who just terminated me an hour ago." A distinct pause came over the line. "Terminated you? On what grounds?" "Insubordination, sir, and for leaning on a shovel too long. Apparently, that is grounds for dismissal, regardless of the 3,000 architectural drawings I submitted last night." Gary lunged toward me, trying to grab the phone. I sidestepped his pathetic attempt, never breaking eye contact with the surrounding crew. "Mr. Sterling," I continued calmly into the phone, "I require a security detail sent to Site Office 1 immediately. I also require the head of HR, Ms. Thorne, and General Counsel Denton to meet me there in 1 hour. We have some immediate structural integrity issues to address internally." "Consider it done, Elijah. Are you secure?" "Perfectly secure, sir. Just making sure the foundation of this company is as structurally sound as the foundations we are pouring." I ended the call. Just then, the site manager, Mr. Davison, came jogging up, alerted by the shouting and the sudden stillness of the work. He looked baffled. "What the hell is going on, Harrison? Did you assault Gary?" Davison demanded, immediately siding with the foreman. Turned slowly to Davison. "Mr. Davison," I said, folding the temporary worker ID and placing it gently in the mud at Gary's feet. "My name is Elijah Rourke, not Harrison." Harrison was the pseudonym on the temp agency paperwork I insisted upon using for my undercover observation period. I held up the permanent badge. Davison's jaw dropped. He recognized the name. Everyone in this business knew the name Rourke. He knew the architectural firm I owned. Gary found his voice, high-pitched and hysterical. "Davison, don't listen to this liar. He's a fraud. I fired him. Get security out here, now." I took a final, deliberate step toward Gary, closing the distance between the two of us. "Gary," I stated, my voice low, erasing any doubt. "Let's clarify the chain of command. You don't work for Mr. Davison. Mr. Davison works for Sterling Development. And Sterling Development reports directly to Rourke and Associates, which ultimately is me." The realization hit him like a hammer blow. "You just fired your boss, Gary. Not just the lead architect, but the primary client who pays every single salary on this site, including yours. The surrounding crew shifted uncomfortably. They knew the casual cruelty they had witnessed for weeks, the microaggressions, the dismissals, the excuses Gary always gave for why certain people couldn't advance. I looked at Davison, who was now visibly shaking. Mr. Davison, I want you to officially escort Mr. Peterson off the premises. Effective immediately, Mr. Peterson is terminated for cause. The cause being chronic workplace misconduct, discriminatory behavior, and gross negligence in managing human capital. Davison didn't hesitate this time. Survival instincts are strong. Gary, you need to come with me, now. Gary staggered backward, denial flooding his face. You can't do this. I have tenure, 15 years. You can't just listen to this. He desperately searched for the racist slur he wanted to use, but fear locked his jaw. You had 15 years, Gary, I countered, feeling nothing but cold resolve. And you spent every single one trying to make other people feel small so you could feel tall. My career was built on integrity and design. Yours was built on prejudice and fear. I watched as Davison physically guided the whimpering, shouting Gary toward the exit gate. Gary was loud, messy, and defeated. The man who had reveled in public humiliation was now suffering his own, broadcast to the entire site. Then I turned back to the crew. Their faces were a map of confusion, guilt, and cautious relief. They were waiting for me to launch into a tirade, or fire half the team in a show of force. Men, I projected my voice, keeping it even. I was here for 6 weeks. I saw who truly worked. I saw who gave cover for each other. I saw the quality of the masonry on Section B, and I saw the shoddy shortcuts taken on the retaining wall in the back. They lowered their heads immediately. But mostly, I saw the environment Gary fostered, one of fear and blatant disrespect. I paused. This site is changing, effective immediately, not because of revenge, but because quality work requires dignity. If you feel safe, you work better. If you feel valued, you build stronger. I pointed toward the main project trailer, now my immediate headquarters. I need a new foreman immediately. Someone who understands that leadership means lifting others up, not kicking them down. I scanned the faces until I found the quiet older pipe fitter, Mr. Johnson, who had given me a precious bottle of cold water on my first sweltering day. I don't care about your resume, Mr. Johnson, I stated clearly. I care about your conduct. Meet me in the trailer in 5 minutes. Mr. Johnson, who had been leaning on his hammer, straightened up completely, shock and hope mixing on his weathered face. Justice had been served cold and swift, but the hard part was just beginning. Firing Gary was merely extracting the obvious tumor. Now, I had to find the structural weakness that allowed him to fester for 15 years. I needed the records. I needed to see the paper trail of every minority employee Gary had ever disciplined or terminated. I walked toward the trailer. The mud seemed less heavy under my work boots now. The heat didn't feel quite so oppressive. The trailer held more than blueprints. It held the history of this site's injustice. And I was about to open the files. The silence that fell over the construction site was a new kind of heavy. It wasn't the noise of machines or the shouts of men. It was the crushing weight of realization. Greg's face, moments before red with fury, was now the color of bleached concrete. I had signed his termination papers right there on a sheet of plywood, using the site superintendent's cheap plastic pen. A formality, a simple signature, executing a massive power shift. The superintendent, a man named Tom, avoided my gaze. He was Greg's friend, but friendship suddenly had a price tag, potential unemployment. I didn't need to shout to establish my authority. Yelling was for men who felt small. I stood tall and spoke clearly. Every worker nearby stopped what they were doing, listening. "This development," I said, my voice echoing slightly off the skeletal steel frame of the future tower, "is predicated on two things: excellence in structure and excellence in conduct." I looked directly at Tom. "Excellence in structure, we can fix with plans. Excellence in conduct, we fix right now." Greg hadn't moved. He stood frozen, his hard hat still on, his safety vest crumpled. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut mid-motion. He finally found his voice, high and thin. "Marcus, wait. We can talk about this. Look, I made a mistake, a massive one. But I know this job. You need me here." He used my first name, desperate now, trying to claw back the false intimacy of the working crew. I walked past him toward the blueprints spread across a makeshift table. I didn't spare him a glance. "I hired you for your operational skills, Greg, not your indispensability." I picked up the phone, ignoring his continued pleas and stammering apologies, which sounded sickeningly hollow now that the stakes were real. I called the headquarters of the main contracting firm, the company that had hired Greg and his entire subcrew. The firm was called Titan Group. I didn't ask for the CEO. I demanded the general counsel. "Marcus Hawthorne here," I stated, my voice calm, professional, and entirely detached. "I need to inform you that Foreman Greg Larson of your subsidiary has been relieved of all duties on the Hawthorne development site, effective immediately." There was a moment of confused silence on the line. They tried to redirect me to HR. "No, I don't speak to HR. I speak to counsel," I insisted. "You misunderstand my position. Greg was not merely fired. He was removed by the owner of the site for documented racial discrimination and gross unprofessionalism in front of multiple witnesses." I let that sink in. The liability is immense, and I, as the property owner and lead architect, have zero tolerance for it. I didn't stop there. Firing Greg was the easy part. The systemic rot was the harder fix. Greg had been loud, but the silence of the other workers, their acceptance of his behavior, was the real problem. I remembered the daily microaggressions. The security guard who always seemed to need to check my ID twice. The suppliers who spoke only to Tom, assuming I was just a runner. The culture of assumed inferiority. I turned back to the phone call. "Counsel, this goes beyond one man. I am formally invoking the clause in our master contract pertaining to ethical misconduct and cultural remediation." The lawyer on the other end sputtered, trying to find the relevant section. I knew it cold. Clause 4.3b. Immediate suspension of all contracted personnel and third-party subcontractors pending a comprehensive independent audit of workplace culture and managerial oversight. I was calling for a full stop, an immediate catastrophic pause on a project worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Greg finally understood the depth of the disaster he had wrought. It wasn't just his job. It was the entire Titan Group contract that was now dangling over a pit of quicksand. He tried one last time, desperation turning to malice, though muffled now. "You'll destroy the timeline, Hawthorne. You can't stop this. It'll cost you millions. No judge will let you shut down a whole site because of a shouting match." I finally turned to look at him. My expression was perfectly neutral, but my eyes held decades of quiet memory. "It wasn't a shouting match, Greg. It was documented professional and racial harassment against the owner of the property. And as for the costs," I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle on him, "I will happily spend $10 million to reset this culture, because that cost is nothing compared to the price of dignity." The legal team confirmed they would dispatch auditors immediately. I ordered Tom, the superintendent, to supervise Greg's immediate escorted departure, making sure Greg only took personal effects and nothing proprietary. The site went quiet again, but this time the quiet held a different lesson. It taught fear, respect, and the sudden realization that every employee was now under scrutiny. I walked back to my temporary office trailer, the blueprint still laid out. I traced the foundation lines. This structure was meant to be flawless, but the emotional foundations were weak. Firing Greg was only the beginning. The systemic issue was the core contract with Titan Group. They had enabled this culture. If I cancelled the entire contract, the chaos would be immense. The legal battle would be brutal. The delay would put the project years behind. But if I didn't, every other racist on the site would simply stay silent, waiting for the next opportunity. I stared at the paperwork defining the Titan Group partnership, a massive stack of legal bindings. I reached for a red pen. The decision was immense. I knew I had to do it. But I needed a strategy to manage the fallout. I picked up the phone again, this time calling my own lawyer, the one who handled high-stakes infrastructure defense. Prepare the paperwork, I instructed, my resolve absolute. I need to cancel the contract with Titan Group, effective 72 hours from now, and I need to start the process of finding a replacement contracting firm before the end of the business day. The chaos was coming, but it was chaos I controlled. I needed to ensure that when the dust settled, Greg's professional reputation was not just damaged, but utterly obliterated from the industry landscape. This couldn't be a minor inconvenience for him. It had to be a definitive, painful reckoning. The architect in me demanded structural integrity. The man in me demanded justice that echoed. The meeting room was glass and steel. It felt clinical. Marcus sat across the large mahogany table. He looked small. All the bluster was gone. The red flush on his face had been replaced by a pale, sickly gray. My legal team, Mr. Vance and Miss Chen, sat beside me. They hadn't said a word, but their presence was heavy. It was the presence of documentation. Marcus tried to clear his throat. He opened his mouth to speak. "Don't," I said. My voice was calm, almost dull. He leaned back, defeated. "You came here today, thinking you could apologize your way back into the job," I continued, "thinking this was about a misunderstanding of hierarchy." He nodded slightly. A flicker of hope returned to his eyes. "It is not," I stated flatly. I looked at him, directly, not with anger, but with professional pity. "Marcus, I didn't just observe how you manage a site. I observed how you manage people. You manage them based on assumptions, prejudice, and a desperate need to feel superior." He gripped the edge of the table. "Elijah, please. It was a mistake. I panicked when I saw the board members approaching. I thought I needed to show strength." "Strength," I interrupted. "Strength is building something with integrity. Strength is recognizing talent, regardless of where it comes from. What you showed was insecurity amplified by bigotry." I picked up the formal termination notice. It was already signed. "When you fired me yesterday, you cited inadequate performance and insubordination," I reminded him. "Those charges are now baseless. They are evidence of discriminatory practice." Marcus's eyes widened. "Discriminatory? No, I never said." "You didn't have to," I replied. "We have your employment records, Marcus. We have the internal reports showing the percentage of non-white workers you continually targeted for punitive disciplinary action. We have the documented audio from the site where you made your intentions clear to the other crew members." Miss Chen slid a large, heavy binder toward him. It landed with a thud. "That folder contains the evidence supporting your termination for cause," she explained, her voice sharp and precise. "It also contains the initial legal filings for racial discrimination against you personally and against the former management firm you represented." Marcus pushed his chair back violently. "You can't do this. I dedicated 10 years to this sector. I built my life on this. And I watched you tear mine down in 30 seconds, I countered, standing up. "You built your career on the backs of people you refused to see as human. Now, that career is gone." He started to plead, rambling about his mortgage, his family. I held up a hand to stop him. I designed this building to be a symbol of growth and fairness. Your presence here, your attitude, would corrupt the entire structure before the foundation cures. You won, he whispered, leaning his head down. Just let me go quietly. Don't sue me. Don't ruin my name. Your actions ruined your name, Marcus. I just documented it. I had the security team escort him out immediately. I watched from the window as they led him to the parking lot. He didn't look back at the towering skeleton of steel he had helped organize, and then lost. My next meeting was with the remaining construction crew. They were gathered in the temporary site office, the same cramped trailer where Marcus had grilled me about my lunch break barely 48 hours earlier. They were nervous. They stood huddled together, shuffling their feet. They didn't know if they were next. I walked to the center of the room. I was no longer wearing the rough denim and work boots I'd worn the day before. Today I wore a crisp suit, the architectural plans tucked under my arm like a shield. I am Elijah Vance. I introduced myself again, though everyone in that room knew exactly who I was now. I am the lead architect and owner of the development firm responsible for this entire project. Silence. Just the low hum of the portable air conditioning unit. What happened yesterday was inexcusable, I continued. Foreman Marcus was terminated, effective immediately. He will not be replaced by another foreman of his management style or temperament. I paused, letting them absorb the relief, the reality. This site is changing. We are building the tallest structure the city has seen in 20 years. That requires the best skill and the highest commitment, and I know many of you possess that. My eyes searched the room, finding David near the back, the gentleman who had tried to help me clean up the spilled coffee cup Marcus had knocked from my hand. David, who had been passed over for promotions 3 times despite superior welding skills, all because Marcus felt he lacked the necessary edge. "David Mbeke!" I called out. David looked up startled. His eyes were wide with apprehension. "Step forward, please." David slowly approached the front. David has been a consistent, reliable presence on this site for 8 months, I told the crew. His work reports are impeccable. His safety record is flawless, and his skills are demonstrably superior. I placed my hand on David's shoulder. It was a gesture of solidarity, not ownership. Effective today, David is promoted to interim site supervisor, reporting directly to the new head of construction management, who will be arriving shortly. David, your job is to ensure that the respect and dignity of every person on this site is non-negotiable. David swallowed hard. He looked around the room. A few of the older crew members started clapping, slowly at first, then rapidly. "Thank you, sir," David managed, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank the quality of your work, David," I corrected him. "That is all that should ever matter here." I addressed the rest of the crew. I need commitment. I need hard work. But mostly I need respect. If you see injustice, report it. If you see discrimination, report it. My door is open. The days of management thriving on fear and humiliation are over. We spent the next hour reviewing the safety protocols and the new company structure. The air in the trailer shifted from fear to focused determination. They weren't just workers anymore. They were stakeholders in a new culture. Later that evening, in my new corner office overlooking the vast expanse of the city, I met with my head of security, Mr. Thompson. The office was quiet. The city lights twinkled far below, reflecting on the preliminary architectural model set up on the table. Marcus made contact. "With the press," Thompson stated simply. I didn't look up from the model. I was tracing the line of a planned sky garden. What is his narrative? He claims wrongful dismissal, claims you are exploiting your position to conduct a personal vendetta against established management. I nodded slowly, predictable. He also claims reverse discrimination, That you only promoted David because he is a black man. I finally looked up. The city lights seemed colder now. Did he specify who he spoke to? I asked. A few of the less reputable digital outlets. Nothing major yet, but it's stirring online chatter. He's trying to preempt the release of our legal findings. Let him, I instructed. His claims are baseless. When we release the documentation of his documented bigotry, every word he has said will sound like the desperate cries of a guilty man. Are we going to hold a press conference, Elijah? Thompson asked. I shook my head. No, Marcus loves the spotlight. He wants a spectacle. We will not give him that platform to play the victim. So, what's the strategy? We finish the building, I said, tapping the model. We focus on construction. We focus on ensuring David succeeds. We file the lawsuits discreetly but decisively. The final justice is not a headline. It is the physical proof that this entire development site now operates with equity and respect. I turned back to the window, watching the site itself. A massive, silent field of possibility. It wasn't enough to fire the foreman. It wasn't enough to win the lawsuit. I had to ensure that the culture of humiliation that allowed men like Marcus to thrive was eradicated from the ground up. That was the real construction project. It was exhausting. The adrenaline rush of confrontation was fading, replaced by the profound weight of responsibility. David had the job. Marcus was gone. The site was moving forward under new ethics. But the old guard, the old thinking, never vanished completely. They just retreated to the shadows, waiting for the moment of weakness. I knew the biggest fight wasn't the legal one. It was the internal fight, the battle to remain vigilant, to ensure the promise of justice wasn't just a moment of poetic satisfaction, but a permanent foundation. And I knew, as I stared into the dark city, that Marcus was not the only one who felt entitled to disrespect. There were bigger players, waiting for their turn to challenge my authority. They were watching, and they were waiting for me to fail. The final legal filings were due in the morning. And then we would truly begin to build. Greg's face dissolved. It wasn't the look of a man fired. It was the look of a man who realized he had just torched his entire professional life, not with a match, but with one ugly word. He tried to plead. His voice was thick and wet. Mr. Sterling, please, this is a misunderstanding. I didn't know who he was. Just let me explain. Mr. Sterling didn't even look at him. Sterling's focus was entirely on me. Mr. Davies, Sterling snapped into his headset, his tone chillingly polite. Ensure security clears this individual from the premises immediately. Do not allow him back on any corporate property. Greg stumbled, clutching his hard hat. He turned to me, desperation twisting his features. Elijah, listen. I apologize. I'm sorry. You can't do this to me. I took a slow breath. I let the silence hang heavy between us. I already did it, Greg, 5 minutes ago, when you judged my work ethic based on the color of my skin. I stepped away from the corporate shield Sterling offered. I walked back toward the dusty center of the worksite. The entire crew was frozen. They stood in clusters, watching the dramatic collapse of the old order. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. My voice was low, but every single person heard it. Look at me. I walked slowly, forcing them all to hold my gaze. This morning, I was Elijah the laborer. That was the jacket I wore. That was the job I was doing. I gestured to the impeccably tailored coat I now wore. This afternoon, I am Elijah King, lead architect, owner of the development. The plans haven't changed. The blueprints are identical. The steel and concrete are the same. I waited, letting the implications sink in. Only the label on the man changed. And that label should never, ever have mattered. The real victory was not about my power. It was about defining what dignity looked like in front of witnesses. The injustice Greg tried to commit, I continued, was not just professional. It was fundamentally human. He didn't fire a worker. He tried to extinguish respect. Today, we are extinguishing that disrespect instead. I turned back to the executives, who were waiting anxiously for my next command. Sterling stepped forward, ready to offer me concessions, favors, and guaranteed apologies. Elijah, we are prepared to terminate our construction management contract entirely if that is what you require. We can replace the entire site leadership team by dawn. I held up a hand. The silence returned. No, I own this development. I intend to see it built, but I won't rely on the fear of an executive email to ensure basic respect is maintained. I scanned the crew again. My eyes stopped on Maria. She was standing near the foundations, clutching a clipboard. Maria, the young black structural engineer, Greg routinely silenced and undermined. Maria, I called out. She jumped slightly, surprised I even knew her name. Yes, Mr. King? You have your professional engineering license. You have your site supervisor certifications, correct? Yes, sir. But Greg always said I lacked. Greg was wrong, I interrupted gently. Effective immediately. You are the interim site supervisor. A gasp went through the crew, followed by a sudden, powerful eruption of applause from the younger workers and the laborers. I want merit here, I stated firmly. No favoritism, no bias. Just the best people doing the best work. Maria earned this. I appointed 2 other key personnel, laborers who had shown me quiet kindness and excellent skill during my time undercover as new team leads. Sterling was aghast. This wasn't the usual corporate cleanup. This was a hostile restructuring. Elijah, these are drastic operational changes. We need time for due diligence. I offered him a weary smile. Mr. Sterling, I have just spent 4 weeks performing due diligence on your people and your culture. I straightened my coat. The dust of the site, the grime of the laborer's life, felt finally washed away. My decision is final. You will support Maria, or you will find that the entire project and every future partnership will be terminated immediately for breach of ethical contract. Sterling swallowed hard and nodded. He knew he was beaten. We will fully comply, Mr. King. Everything you require. I began walking toward my car. The police officer Greg had likely called was just pulling up. He looked utterly confused by the scene, a man being escorted out by corporate security, and me, the supposed troublemaker, walking toward a 6-figure luxury sedan. Mr. King? The officer asked, recognizing me from my neighborhood community board work. It's fine, officer, I replied, opening the driver's side door. The misunderstanding has been rectified. Dignity has been restored to this property. I got in and started the engine. I glanced back at the site in my rearview mirror. Greg was gone. The executives looked like statues. Maria, however, was already in motion, giving directions to a group of men who, just hours ago, wouldn't have met her eye. The satisfaction was real, but it wasn't the explosive triumph I might have imagined in my younger days. It was a deep, quiet relief, the cold, necessary weight of justice. I had addressed Greg's individual prejudice. I had reversed the immediate injustice. But the system that allowed men like Greg to flourish, the boards, the corporate HR departments, the cultural blindness, that system was still standing tall, unbuilt. This battle was won in the mud. The war, however, was waiting for me tomorrow. It was a paperwork war, a policy war. I knew, as I pulled onto the main road, that firing one man was only the foundation. The real architecture of respect still needed building, and I was the only one holding the pen.